Back in 2006, I was at Hollywood Studios with my mom. She had just turned 52, and this trip was part of her birthday celebration. Now, my mom, she wasn't the roller coaster type. She liked calm rides, shows, walking around with popcorn, that kind of thing. But for whatever reason that day, maybe she felt bold. Maybe she just wanted to impress me. She looked at the rock and roller coaster and said, "Let's do it." I looked at her like, "Seriously? That ride launches you from 0 to 60 in like 3 seconds, loops you upside down, whips you through the dark to Aerosmith blasting in your ears. It's intense." I even told her, "Hey, you don't have to prove anything." But she laughed it off and said she felt fine. She even made a joke about Steven Tyler being worth the headache. We got in line. She seemed totally chill, chatting with the people in front of us, looking around at the neon lights. We strapped in, the countdown started, and then boom, we shot forward into the dark like a missile. First, I was screaming, laughing, loving it, but somewhere after that first loop, I realized I couldn't hear her next to me. Like no noise, not even breathing. I turned my head mid-ride, which was hard to do with all that force, and I saw her body slumped back in the seat. She wasn't moving. When the ride pulled back into the station, I unbuckled and started yelling. Staff came rushing over. One of them hit some kind of emergency button and called for medics. They pulled her out and laid her on the ground right there on the platform. And I just stood there frozen, surrounded by strangers, music still playing overhead like nothing happened. They tried CPR, over and over. I kept watching her chest, waiting for it to rise, but it never did. We spent the next few hours in the park's medical center while they tried everything. Eventually, a doctor came out, real quiet, and said she hadn't made it. Just like that. She lost consciousness during the ride and never came back. They said it was something with her heart. Pre-existing condition, probably. Nothing to do with the ride malfunctioning, just too much strain, too fast, too intense. I remember being angry, not at her, not even at the park, really, just at how fast it all happened. She was alive, smiling, joking, and then in the blink of an eye, she was gone. And I was standing there, in the middle of a theme park, surrounded by happy families and kids with Mickey ears, holding her bag and trying not to collapse. Disney added more warning signs after that. You know, all the usual stuff, don't ride if you've got heart problems, back problems, whatever. But they were already there. They'd always been there. People just don't think it'll happen to them. We didn't. Now every time I hear Aerosmith, especially that one song, Love in an Elevator, it takes me back to that moment, that ride, that launch, that silence, and I haven't set foot on another roller coaster since. It was back in 2009, right before Christmas, and I was working at Magic Kingdom. I'd picked up some extra shifts during the holidays. Money was tight and Disney always needed bodies during peak season. I was part of the Spectra Magic parade crew. If you've ever seen it, you know, big lights, music blasting, floats glowing like a neon dream rolling down Main Street. Magical for guests, hectic as hell behind the scenes. I wasn't one of the performers. I worked support, mostly walking alongside floats to keep the crowd back and make sure everything stayed on track. That night, I was assigned to one of the middle floats. It was shaped like a glowing sea serpent, real wide and low to the ground. The kind that barely leaves room for your foot to breathe. Now here's the thing, those floats look slow, but when you're up close walking next to him, they're moving just fast enough that if something goes wrong, you don't get time to fix it. And something went very wrong. Some kid tossed a glowing Mickey wand right near the float path, and without thinking, I reached down to move it out of the way. I figured I had a second, maybe half a second, but that float didn't wait. I misjudged the timing just barely, and then one of the front wheels rolled right over my left foot. Not the whole leg, just the foot. But man, it felt like a truck hit me. I went down hard, lights still flashing, music still playing, and guests were clapping like it was part of the act. Meanwhile, I'm flat on my back biting my lip so I don't scream loud enough to freak out the crowd. They had protocol for this kind of thing, code phrases over the radios, reroute the float path, clear the area. Within minutes, I was off the route and in the back, surrounded by managers and medical staff. Turns out I had multiple fractures in my foot. A couple bones were crushed bad enough that I needed pins put in. I was out of work for weeks, limping around on crutches through the holidays. Disney was decent about it. Covered my medical bills, gave me time off, even sent me some merch like that'd make up for a crushed foot. But after that, they changed a bunch of safety rules. Extra training, better float clearance zones, new communication systems. All because of that 1 second where I tried to pick up a stupid wand. Even now, when I visit the park and see those parades rolling by, I get this weird little ache in my foot. Not just from the injury, but from knowing how close the magic can get to breaking you if you're not careful. It was the summer of 2013, and I was staying at Disney's Pop Century Resort with my nephew. He was 12 at the time, full of energy, bouncing off the walls from the moment we landed in Orlando. After a long day in the parks, we hit the resort pool that evening. Classic Florida sunset, warm breeze, pool lights glowing. It was perfect. There were other families around, music playing, kids laughing. My nephew jumps in first, swims straight to the edge where those little lights are built into the walls under the water. I'm still on the lounge chair, kicking back with a soda, not really paying full attention. Then I hear him scream. Not a playful splash scream, this one froze me. I look up and he's clinging to the side of the pool, his face twisted up like he's being pulled or held underwater by something. I run over, yelling his name, and he's trying to shout back, but his body isn't moving right. I jump in, and when I grab him, I feel it too. A jolt straight up my arm, sharp and hot, like touching a live wire. I yanked him away from the pool wall, and the second we broke contact, the shock stopped. I dragged him to the steps, out of the water, and he just collapsed. Couldn't move his legs. His hands were stiff, his lips turning pale. I'm panicking, other people start running over, and within minutes there's a crowd and lifeguards yelling into radios. Paramedics showed up fast, thank God. They said he was in some kind of temporary paralysis. He had burns on his hands and feet where the current entered and exited his body. They rushed him to the hospital and he ended up in the ICU for a couple days. Turns out there was an electrical fault in the pool. Something with the wiring near one of the underwater lights. Water and electricity, not a great combo. They shut the whole thing down for an investigation, drained it, rewired everything. Disney handled the bills, apologized, gave us free passes and all that. But man, that didn't undo the trauma. My nephew recovered, but he didn't swim again for almost a year. Wouldn't even get near a hotel pool. And I don't blame him. 1 minute he was just playing like any other kid, and the next he's getting electrocuted in the middle of the happiest place on earth. Now every time we stay anywhere with a pool, I double check everything. Lights, grates, anything that looks off. I got no shame about it. Because once you see something like that, feel that kind of panic, it never really leaves you. It was the 4th of July weekend, 2009. Disneyland was packed as usual. Families everywhere. Fireworks ready to go off. Kids melting down from too much sugar and too much heat. I was headed back to the parking lot late that night. Tired, sunburned, holding a half-eaten Mickey pretzel in one hand and my girlfriend's flip-flop in the other because it broke halfway through the park. We decided to take the monorail from the transportation and ticket center back to the hotel. Now, if you've never been on the monorail at Disney, it's like their version of a train, advanced-looking, clean, smooth. Usually. That night, not so much. We were on one of the trains, just sitting there, not moving yet. People were chatting, yawning, kids asleep on shoulders. And then, it happened. It was this boom sound. Not loud like an explosion, but deep. Like metal hitting metal, and everything shuddered. The lights flickered. A few people screamed. I thought maybe something had hit the monorail from outside. I looked out the window and that's when I saw it. Another train. Right there. Way too close. It had crashed into us. People were jumping up now, trying to figure out what just happened. Some were trying to pry doors open, but cast members rushed in and told everyone to sit tight. My heart was pounding. I couldn't see much, but I heard someone say, "Oh my God, the driver. He's not moving." It wasn't until later we found out the truth. The driver of the other train, Austin Wenenberg, he was 21 years old. Same age I was back then. He didn't make it. He got trapped in the cab when the two trains collided. They said it was a communication error. Some kind of signal was given too early or not at all, and the safety system just didn't catch it. The whole thing should have been impossible, right? That's what we always thought. Disney monorails don't crash. But it happened. They evacuated us eventually. Had us walk along this narrow platform back to the station. Everyone was quiet. No crying, no yelling, just silence. You could feel it in the air, like we'd just seen something we weren't supposed to. Some people had scrapes or bruises from the jolt. I had a sore shoulder for a week from hitting the side rail. But that was nothing compared to what that kid's family was going through. I still think about him. Austin, just a guy doing his job. Probably had plans for the weekend. Maybe even watched the fireworks earlier that day. And then, just like that, gone. Every time I ride the monorail now, which isn't often, I look at the front car and I wonder who's driving. I wonder if they think about that night. I wonder if they feel safe. 'Cause I don't. Not really. It was right after Hurricane Irma rolled through in 2017, and I was staying at Fort Wilderness. Yeah, the campground one at Disney. My wife and I thought it'd be cool to rent one of those fancy little cabins. Bit of nature, bit of Disney magic, right? We figured, hey, we're tough. Florida storms come and go. Disney's gotta have their stuff together. So the storm passed. A lot of wind, a lot of rain, but nothing insane where we were. Power flickered, trees swayed, but it all calmed down by morning. Sun was peeking out, birds chirping like nothing happened. I stepped outside to grab something from the car. That's when it happened. No warning, no cracking, no creaking. It just fell like thunder, but way closer. A massive tree came down right behind the cabin. Smacked straight into me like it had been waiting all night to take me out. I didn't even see it until I was already under it. Next thing I know, I'm flat on the ground, can't move my neck, back screaming, and I'm trying to figure out if I just imagined the whole thing. My wife came running out and totally lost it. She thought I was dead. The tree had clipped my shoulder and landed across my lower back. I couldn't feel much at first, then suddenly I felt everything. Paramedics had to cut through the damn branches to get to me. I was lying there in the dirt, soaked, bleeding, and thinking, this is how I go? At a Disney campground? Turns out the tree had been damaged in the storm. We weren't even supposed to be out there yet. Disney had started letting people back in, probably too early if you ask me, and they hadn't cleared all the debris or checked for weak trees. They said they assessed the area. Well, guess they missed a big one. Ended up with a herniated disc in my back, nerve damage in my neck, and months of physical therapy. Still can't sleep on my left side without feeling like I've got a steel rod down my spine. And yeah, I sued. I didn't want to go that route, but come on. They led us into a storm-damaged forest and didn't bother warning anyone that a tree might just decide to fall on your spine. You think Disney's got it all figured out, like they're invincible when it comes to safety. But all it took was one storm, one missed tree, and one step out the cabin door for everything to change. I still get nervous when I hear branches move in the wind. Doesn't matter if it's in my backyard or a theme park. My body just locks up. And Fort Wilderness? Never going back. I don't care how cozy those cabins are. I've seen what's waiting in those trees. It was summer 2016, and I was down at Disney's Grand Floridian Resort with my wife and our little girl. She was 3 at the time. We were doing one of those laid-back evenings by the water, just relaxing after a long day in the parks. You know the spot, the edge of the Seven Seas Lagoon. Beautiful view of the castle, boats drifting by, soft music in the background. Felt like one of those perfect Disney moments. There were a few families out there with us. Kids running around barefoot in the sand, some of them splashing near the edge of the water. Nothing crazy, just toddlers being toddlers. And there were no fences or warning signs back then. Not a single one. Just a pretty beach and a whole lot of trust that, hey, this is Disney, it must be safe. And then, it happened. This little boy couldn't have been older than 2. He was right near the shore with his parents a few feet away. I remember because he was playing with a little red bucket, scooping sand and laughing. His dad was snapping pictures. Mom had a drink in her hand. It was peaceful, quiet. And then we heard this splash. Not the kind of splash from a kid jumping in water. This was heavier, fast, violent. In that same second, we heard the scream. Not a regular scream either. It was the kind that cuts straight through your chest. I turned my head just in time to see the back of this giant alligator sliding into the water, and the dad diving in right after it. Chaos exploded around us. People were yelling, running, trying to figure out what just happened. The mom dropped to her knees. She was shaking so bad, screaming her son's name over and over. The dad came back up out of the water, soaked and empty-handed. His face, man, I'll never forget that face. Pure shock, like his soul had been ripped out. Disney staff rushed in, but it was already too late. The kid was gone, just like that. 1 second playing in the sand, next second, nothing. They shut the area down and had search teams out there all night. Helicopters, divers, the works. They found the boy's body the next day not too far from where it happened. Still didn't feel real even then. That whole trip took a dark turn after that. You could feel the heaviness in the air. No one talked much. People were holding their kids tighter. The magic felt shattered. A few weeks later, fences went up. Signs started popping up everywhere warning folks not to go near the water, not to feed wildlife, that kind of thing. But all of that came too late for that family. And for the rest of us who saw it, that moment never left. I still can't stand near open water in Florida without looking twice. Especially with my daughter. I always picture that red bucket in the sand. And I'll never again assume a place is safe just because it's got fireworks and fairy tales. So it was 2014, and I was at Magic Kingdom with my cousin and his kids. Hot day, packed park, all the usual Disney chaos. Around mid-afternoon, we decided to cool off and hit Pirates of the Caribbean. You know, the boat ride with the catchy song and the robotic drunk pirates. Nice, chill vibe, or so I thought. We get in the boat and I end up in the back row, right on the edge. I've been on this ride a dozen times, so I wasn't even paying attention to the safety spiel. I was too busy trying to snap a photo of the skull above the entrance, not realizing I had my hand resting over the side of the boat. Fingers just casually hanging off like I was lounging in a canoe on a lazy river. Right after that first little drop, the one that gets your butt just wet enough to be annoying, the boat shifted a little weird, like it got caught or dragged for a second. And that's when I felt it. Not a pinch, not a bump, a grind. My fingers got caught between the edge of the boat and some part of the ride track or mechanism underneath the water. I didn't even have time to pull away. It just happened. The pain was instant, like someone took a cigar cutter to my hand. I yanked my arm back and just stared. 2 fingertips gone. Not the whole fingers, but enough that they were mangled and bleeding like crazy. I remember holding my hand up and thinking, did that really just happen on a slow boat ride with singing pirates? The worst part, the ride didn't even stop. We still had to float through the entire rest of it while I sat there clutching my hand, trying not to scream in front of a boat full of toddlers. Blood was dripping down my arm, and I'm just trying to stay conscious while a pirate sings, "Yo-ho, yo-ho," next to a burning town scene. Finally, we got to the unload area and I stood up yelling for help. Cast members rushed over. One of them looked like he was gonna faint. They wrapped my hand in towels and hustled me to first aid, then straight to the hospital. Couple surgeries later, I was left with 2 short fingertips and a lifetime of awkward high fives. Disney paid for the medical stuff, sure. They even updated the ride afterward, put in more warning signs, added barriers to keep hands inside the boat. But man, none of that helps once your fingers are already floating somewhere in the lagoon under Captain Jack Sparrow. So yeah, I lost part of my hand on Pirates of the Caribbean. Not Space Mountain, not Tower of Terror, freaking pirates. And now every time someone says, keep your hands inside the ride at all times, I nod real hard, because I asterisk didn't, and I've got the stumpy fingers to prove it. It was 2011, and I was at Epcot with my sister and her 2 kids. We'd been bouncing from country to country all day, stuffing our faces with snacks, and right before we were about to call it a night, she says, "Let's do one more ride, Test Track." Now, I'd never been on it before, but she hyped it up like it was Disney's version of NASCAR. So we go. Her kids are all excited. I'm thinking, sure, why not? It's Disney. How wild can it really be? So we get in the car, those weird little futuristic ones with the doors that snap shut like they're about to launch us into space, and we start rolling. It's kind of cool at first, you know? You're weaving through these tests. Heat resistance, handling curves, sudden stops. Then comes that outside part where the ride kicks into full speed and shoots around the track. Well, just before we hit that final turn, the one where the ride is supposed to open up and fly around at like 60 miles an hour, everything stops. Dead stop. No slowdown, no warning, just stop. Felt like getting rear-ended at a red light by a truck you didn't see coming. My head snapped forward, hit the headrest on the way back. I heard this awful pop in my neck. My sister let out a yelp, and the kids in the back got real quiet. It wasn't your typical, oops, technical difficulties kind of stop. The whole car jerked like it smacked into something invisible. They eventually moved us off the ride, super calm, like nothing serious happened. One of the employees even joked, "Guess you passed the crash test." I couldn't even laugh, I was seeing stars. By the time we got outside, my back was on fire. Neck felt like it had a knot the size of a baseball. I ended up in urgent care later that night, and then herniated disc, muscle strain, nerve irritation. I couldn't even sit comfortably for weeks. Had to sleep in a recliner like an old man. I ended up getting legal help. Didn't want to, but Disney wasn't exactly quick to take responsibility. The whole thing got settled out of court, and they never admitted much. But apparently, there was a glitch in the braking system, something that was supposed to keep that kind of stop from happening. Didn't work. They fixed it later, of course, after I'd already been crunched like a soda can. To this day, I won't ride Test Track. Every time someone brings it up, I just shake my head and say, "That ride already tested me, man. I failed."